Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today we are going to continue our saga of women demons. And last time we had the introduction to Lilith. This time, however, we are going to continue with the story, and I do believe that this part is the most famous one, but we will see. Let's read them. The Other Woman. Look up at the Sistine Chapel ceiling and slightly to the right of the creation of Adam, where God stretches out his hand to imbue man with the spark of life. You'll see a panel called The Temptation, showing Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. Adam is reaching up into the tree to take the fruit himself, pulling back a branch with one huge hand, aggressive, almost greedy. Eve, in contrast, looks utterly at ease, lounging against a rocky outcrop. Her naked, muscular body is facing away from the tree, and she is barely even glancing at it as she reaches up to take the fateful fruit. It is a surprisingly casual attitude for a woman in the act of disobeying God's explicit commandment, made more surprising still given that she is not picking the fruit herself but taking it from the outstretched hand of a monster. This creature, with its tail wrapped in thick, fleshy coils around the trunk of the tree, is the serpent of Eden. But in Michelangelo's painting, it has the face and bare breasts of a woman. This is Lilith, no longer a species of demon as she is on the incantation bowls, but a single figure with a vital role to play in the creation myth. With her blonde red hair, she looks almost a twin to Michelangelo's tow-headed Adam. Eve, in contrast, is a brunette, and this is not a coincidence. Lilith is not just a snake of Eden, but she is the first wife of Adam. They were made out of same clay, hence their similar appearances. But Lilith was cast out of paradise after demanding equality with her husband. Convenient, isn't it? Her tempting of Eve isn't just a devil-driven strategy to bring about the fall. It's the act of a scorned first wife, filled with jealousy at the divine couple and getting her revenge. Michelangelo did not draw the legend of his Lilith from Christian teachings. Instead, he was influenced by the Cabala, a form of Jewish mysticism that became increasingly popular in Europe during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, even among Christians. Although Michelangelo was probably not a Kabbalist himself, he would have plenty of chances of encountering Kabbalistic beliefs. One of his advisors, Egidio da Viterbo, was a student of Cabala, and when Michelangelo lived at the Medici Palace, he may well have come across Pico della Mirandola, one of the most important Christian Kabbalists of the time. This Kabbalistic Lilith was not just the snake in the garden and the first wife of Adam. She was a succubus, dangerous to all men. Having condemned as sorcerers women who tried to protect themselves and their children against our demons, having ridiculed those who believed in them as foolish old women, a new pattern is starting here, one that we will see repeated again and again through the Middle Ages to the modern day. man had worked out a way to turn the legends of Lilith on their own needs, to use them to reflect their own fears, principally their fears of women. The Lilith of Michelangelo and the Kabbalists see Lilith as the other woman, an interloper in Adam and Eve's marriage, albeit she was technically their first, who would go on to destroy mortal men's marriages as well. She was a destructive force, seducing innocent men, conceiving illegitimate children with them, and even demanding a demonic inheritance when her mortal lovers died. She, like the seductive Lamia before her, stood against everything a woman was supposed to be, in both Jewish and Christian teachings. Lilith had been flipped. No longer was she a way of confronting, exploring, and comforting women's very real fears about the dangers of pregnancy and infant mortality. Instead, she was a conduit for male fears of sexuality and sexual impurity, of women who might lead them astray, might give them illegitimate children, might tempt them away from their wife and away from God. The earliest and perhaps best known story of Lilith in Eden appears in the text known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira. Ben Sira was a respected Jewish author who lived in Jerusalem in around 200 BC and wrote the Sirach, an important book of Jewish ethical teachings. The Alphabet of Ben Sira, on another hand, dates around AD 700-1000. That is, the period just following the incantation bowls, and is anything but a serious text. The first and oldest half of the alphabet is fairly unremarkable and consists of some dull Aramaic proverbs, but the second half tells the story of Ben Sira being called to the court of Nebuchadnezzar II and solving problems for the Babylon king. These problems, their solutions, and the stories that Ben Sira tells to the king about them are odd, to say the least. To the extent that the manuscript is normally described as satirical, with some people even claiming that it was an anti-Semitic text, given the way that it turns biblical stories and Jewish heroes on their heads. Ben Sira, for example, who is himself a mystically wise toddler, gets Nebuchadnezzar's overly flatulent daughter to stop farting, answers the mystery of why donkeys urinate in the urine of the other donkeys, and claims to be the son and grandson of the prophet Jeremiah, conceived when his mother, who was also Jeremiah's daughter, bathed in the same fountain where Jeremiah had recently and publicly masturbated. It's quite a story, quite a book. To say this all sits oddly alongside so many serious religious figures is an understatement. Nebuchadnezzar's presence may well be part of the joke too. The real Nebuchadnezzar, who lived around 400 years before the real Ben Sira, was the king who conquered Judea, destroyed Jerusalem, and instigated the Babylonian captivity. Hardly the resume of a man a Jewish scholar should be helping out. Among the many issues that Nebuchadnezzar asks Ben Sira to solve is a deadly illness of his young son. Ben Sira, having been threatened with death if he fails to save the boy, sits at the child's bedside and inscribes an amulet with the names of 3 angels. Nebuchadnezzar asks who these angels are, and Ben Sira explains with a story. This story is so important to the lore of Lilith, it's worth reproducing it in full. The angels who are in charge of medicine are Snvi, Snsui. Oh my god, okay, we are missing the vowels. Snvi, Snsvi, and Smnglov. Nailed it. When God created his world and created Adam, he saw that Adam was alone, and he immediately created a woman from earth like him for him. He brought her to Adam, and they immediately began to fight. Adam said, "You shall lie below," and Lilith said, "You shall lie below." So they immediately went to the business. For we are equal, and both of us were created from earth. They did not listen to each other. When Lilith saw the state of things, she uttered the ineffable name and flew into the air and fled. Adam immediately stood in prayer before God and said, "Master of the universe, see, the woman you gave me has already fled away." God immediately sent 3 angels and told them, "Go and fetch Lilith. If she agrees to come, bring her, and if she does not, bring her by force." So, bring her or bring her. The 3 angels went immediately and caught up with her in the sea, in the place that the Egyptians were destined to die, that is, the Red Sea. They seized her and told her, "If you agree to come with us, come, and if you not, we shall drown you in the sea." She answered, "Darlings, I know myself that God created me only to afflict babies with fatal disease when they were 8 days old. I shall have permission to harm them from their birth to the 8th day and no longer. When it is a male baby, but when it is a female baby, I shall have permission for 12 days. The angels would not leave her alone until she swore by God's name that wherever she would see them or their names in the amulet, she would not possess the babies. They then left immediately. My gosh, these incompetent angels, the 3 of them, could not convince one poor Lilith to come back or stop, harassing babies. I'm enjoying this story very much, if you may not see. This is a charm story like those for Melitan and Gello. Lilith flees to the sea, is chased by the protectors with S and N names, and promises that she will not attack children whenever their names are written. Like all the charms, telling the story protects against the demon, since it contains both a repetition of the saints' names and the monster's promise that where they were spoken, she will be powerless. It even contains within it the important information about the exact number of days that male and female children are at risk. This is a story that is focused first and foremost on the protection of children. It is far less concerned about how awkwardly this fits into the Eden narrative. Like Gello, Lilith claims that she was created to inflict babies with fatal diseases. A jarring statement given that we have just seen God create her as a wife for Adam, and clearly a hangover from these earlier myths. She also flies, hardly a skill a newly made human would have possessed, and a throwback from her traditional demonic winged form. But while Lilith is as child-killing and sexually self-possessed here as she has been in earlier sources, and the story itself is based on one told about plenty of other monsters. The tale that appears in the Alphabet of Ben Sira still represents an astonishing promotion for her. She has been upgraded from a species of murderous demons to a single figure with a starring role in the Garden of Eden. Her own motivations and knowledge of the ineffable name. A monster who is uncontrollable by both her husband and, to a certain extent, by God himself. The difficulty, of course, is that while this was to become a very commonly repeated myth in the Middle Ages, this first attestation of it comes from a source so full of masturbation and dirty humor that it's hard to know what parts of it to take seriously. It's like trying to determine the plot of a film based only on its pornographic parody. Since the alphabet had a tendency to dirty up stories, it's quite possible that the conflict over sexual positions was part of its satire. It's also notable that Adam, and to some extent even God, do not come across very well. Adam has no control over Lilith. In his statement, Master of the universe, see the woman you gave me has already fled away, is amusingly pathetic. God seems incredibly ineffectual as well. He cannot bring Lilith back, and even his angels are left to make terms instead of dragging her home or drowning her as they intended. As we'll see in later, more official versions of the story, Lilith is rejected by Adam and cast into the sea by God. A much more deferential and an interesting story. However, the idea of a first wife for Adam who pre-existed Eve is not something invented by the alphabet. There is even a place in Genesis for her to slot in. In the books of Genesis, there are two accounts of the creation of woman. In the first, God creates man and woman together. And God created man to his own image. To the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Genesis 1:27. However, later on, God creates Eve from Adam's rib. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. Genesis 2:20-22. This discrepancy is almost certainly because the book of Genesis, and in fact all of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which together make up the Torah, was written by 4 different authors, each telling roughly the same story. These accounts are awkwardly meshed together by later editors, leaving a whole host of odd little contradictions like this one. There isn't a missing bride in these accounts and the creation of woman, just the same story told twice and slightly different ways. Of course, in late antiquity and the Middle Ages, these sorts of explanations were off the table, and resolutions had to be found that didn't accuse the text itself of being inconsistent or imperfect. One of the explanations for these 2 creations of women was that there was a first wife, a predecessor of Eve, who had been removed from the scene by the time of the second wife was made from Adam's rib. Lilith was tailor name to fill the gap. In rabbinic literature that predated the Alphabet of Ben Sira, there was already a suggestion that she had slept with Adam, or at the very least stolen his semen. Adam and Eve were thought to have separated for 130 years at some point after the fall, and during this separation, demons were said to have slept with both of them, breeding a whole range of monsters. Okay. This is discussed in the Babylonian Talmud, so in a text written at the same time as the incantation bowls and sometime before Alphabet. And although the female demons Adam was sleeping with are never named, on the list of demons that Talmud claims Adam fathered are the Lilith, the male versions of Lilith. In an attempt to protect Adam's reputation, it was also made clear that this demonic family was not brought into being because Adam was merrily having sex with demons left and right. Instead, the demon children were created through semen, which he emitted accidentally, and was stolen by demonesses, suggesting nocturnal emissions and again linking his unnamed female demoness to Lilith. My gosh. Of course, let's not blame Adam. The demons were stealing his semen left and right. Precious, very precious. Anyway, it's likely then that it was this tradition that gave Lilith entry into the Garden of Eden. A lover of Adam, slipping in to become the mysterious predecessor of Eve. After all, a monster who was partnered with Adam after Eve might well have partnered with him before Eve as well. Whatever, before, after, right? Okay. This too explains another point of interest in the alphabet, Lilith's children. In later versions of the alphabet story, her punishment was, for resisting God's demand that she return to Adam, is that 100 of her children would die every day, an odd penalty given that Lilith had always been the antithesis of a mother and had never previously shown much ability to produce or want her own offspring. But as a post-fall seductress of Adam, she is suddenly very prolific, giving birth to whole races of demons with her mortal lover. This demonic fertility would become an important aspect of Lilith's mythology in the Middle Ages, not to mention a vital part of her status as the archetypal other woman. Lilith's role in the Garden of Eden and her partnership with Adam was unlikely to have been entirely limited to the textual tradition or even conceived for the alphabet. The satirical notes of the story, the sexual elements, and God and Adam's slightly pathetic qualities are unconnected to the idea of Lilith as the first wife of Adam. And our demons being Adam's first wife extended beyond Lilith as well. To some extent, trying to pick apart the true story of Alphabet was riffing off, and what elements were added by the alphabet is pointless. In the late Middle Ages, the story would be adopted wholesale by Jewish mystics. It may have started as a joke, or at least as part of a joke, but it would eventually take on a life on its own. This would come when it blended with Kabbalism, which had already created a whole host of new Lilith traditions. From the 12th century on, Kabbalism, the study and practice of esoteric Jewish mysticism, grew enormously in popularity. There are plenty of Kabbalistic traditions, including Lilith-based ones, that spread widely in the late Middle Ages, both into mainstream Judaism and beyond. Although the first Kabbalistic text dates to around the 3rd century BC, the majority are from the Middle Ages. The first one that relates to Lilith is called the Treatise of the Land. The Treatise on the left emanation. Okay. And was written in the 13th century by a rabbi, Isaac ben Jacob HaKohen in Spain. At that time, a center for Kabbalistic thought. Spain. The time of Inquisition was gone. Never mind. In this text, Lilith is the wife of Samael, who was himself not only the king of the demons, but associated with both Satan and the angel of death. Samael even had his own connection to the Garden of Eden. It was sometimes suggested he conspired with the snake to bring about the fall, a perfect partner for Lilith. Rabbi Isaac had not invented this pairing himself. Samael and Lilith had been linked before in a later manuscript of the Alphabet of Ben Sira, dating to the 11th century. Here, instead of simply not returning to the garden with the god's angels, Lilith offers an explanation for why she cannot return. Her reasoning is, I cannot return because of what is said in the Torah. Her former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after that she was defiled. That is, when he was not the last to sleep with her, and the great demon has already slept with me. My God, so the whole fall of angels and demons was already happened. I'm not visualizing the timeline here because obviously we have the whole section. I do believe that the fall of angels is mentioned somewhere in the Bible, the official Bible, but most of the story is kind of described in Book of Enoch that, again, Catholic Church does not recognize. But seriously, where did the demon, it had to be, the fall of angels and the creation of demons had already had to happen, right? Because Samael is a fallen angel. So, there we go. She ran away from Eden. She found Samael, or Samael found her. She slept with him. Whatever happened. And then she's saying, I can't come back because, I got better. Okay, I have to stop. Here Lilith provides a scripture-based reason for not returning to Adam. It's best to ignore the fact that the Torah would not have been written by the time she fled the garden. Even Genesis would have been full of spoilers. In fact, it's a suspiciously proper reason for a woman who had recently defied God, had sex with the king of demons, and planned on spending her days murdering small children. It has been suggested that this reasoning was added to the text to try to make the story a bit more respectful to God. It wasn't that he or his angels couldn't bring her back. It was that his own commandments forbade her to return. Make it make sense. It might seem ridiculous to try and make Alphabet story taken from the manuscript full of public masturbation and farting into something that was sensible and reverential, although, as we'll see, this wouldn't be the only time that Lilith's story of the Alphabet of Ben Sira was taken entirely at face value. What doesn't seem unlikely is that this perfectly halakhic excuse would have occurred to the author of this later alphabet variant had there not already been a tradition of Lilith and Samael sleeping together. The author of the later Ben Sira was therefore likely picking up on the pre-existing legends, rather than inventing Lilith's relationship with Samael.
When the treatise of the left emanation was written a couple of centuries later, it was presumably still a common legend. In a treatise, though, the relationship with Samael doesn't just happen after the fall as it does in the later alphabet. Instead, it entirely replaces Lilith's relationship with Adam, both during his 130-year separation from Eve and as his first wife. According to the text, Lilith and Samael were created together, as were Adam and Eve, with the former representing the monstrous opposites of the latter. Lilith and Samael were evil, and Adam and Eve were good. Supposedly. Lilith and Samael are parents to a race of demons, while Adam and Eve are the father and mother of all humanity. Whatever you say. The treatise also picks up on a more ancient tradition, that of Liliths as a species. There are at least two different Liliths in the text. One is the Grand Dame Lilith, partnered with Samael. The other is a younger or lesser Lilith who is partnered with Samael's second in command, Asmodeus. This younger Lilith was said to be more beautiful and to have inspired the jealousy of Samael. Prevented from being the other woman to Adam and Eve, Lilith was here as the other woman to herself. Lilith's importance to Cabala was compounded by her appearance in the Zohar. This text is one of the most important of Kabbalistic tradition, and appears in the 13th century in Spain, where it was discovered and published by Moses de Leon, who claimed it was written in 70 AD. Given that the Zohar references plenty of events that occurred well after 70 AD, this very early composition date was questioned immediately on its publication, and it's now generally accepted that the entire thing was written by Moses de Leon himself. Surprise. One man even claimed to have heard Moses' wife admit to this after Moses' death. And the original manuscript Moses said he discovered was certainly never materialized. Given this, there were plenty of Kabbalists who never accepted the Zohar's authenticity. But the Zohar and some of the ideas it expressed nonetheless became well known and popular in the mainstream Judaism and beyond. In the Zohar, it's no longer Lilith and Samael who stand in contrast to Eve and Adam, but Lilith alone who opposes the divine pair. Here she is once again the first wife of Adam, but she doesn't seem like an intentional creation of God, and she certainly wasn't made from clay. Instead, she emerges from a dark shell that God builds around the radiance of the primordial light. According to the Zohar, she initially stayed with the cherubim until God created Adam and brought Lilith down to be with him. When Lilith was no help to Adam, God created Eve, and Lilith, seeing the perfect beauty of the divine couple together, flew away in jealousy. God cast her into the bottom of the sea, allowing her to return to the world only after the fall, to murder Adam and Eve's offspring. Okay, so God was like, you know what? Come back. Here, incidentally, we can see a much more respectful version of the Ben Sira story. Adam doesn't want Lilith back. Eve replaces her because she has failed at her job of being a helpmeet to Adam, and she doesn't escape to the depths of sea. Instead, she is thrown there by God. Lilith, as usual, has children by Adam, although exactly when they are conceived is a little complicated, and the Zohar doesn't specify. Maybe it was before Eve turned up. Maybe it was after the fall during the 130-year separation. There is a female demoness who does sleep with Adam during his separation from Eve in the Zohar, and while she is named Na-Mah, she acts exactly like Lilith, causing wet dreams in order to steal semen to have her own demonic children. Oh my gosh. Seriously. And we thought the Greeks were scandalous. Never mind. The irony is that despite all these complex, respectful stories that had been well thought through by high-level scholars, depth of Judaic lore, these are not the stories that are remembered. The legend that was told time and time again, that is repeated most, is the story about the Alphabet of Ben Sira. In the later Middle Ages, it was slotted into Kabbalistic tradition as a serious legend, shorn of its context, and it has appeared in its form ever since. There is plenty of encyclopedias of Judaism or essays on Lilith, or collections of myths that present her story from the alphabet with no mention of its satirical context. There are half a dozen reasons why this might be the case, including that, as a charm story, it's likely it was passed down to protect against Lilith. But the most probable explanation is that it's simply a better story, better told, and more firmly attached to the traditions that people actually recognized. It's not just that the stories about Lilith in the treatise of the left emanation or the Zohar are a bit dull, is that they are told in fragments, each one trying to veil its meaning, to cram in as much esoteric scholarship as possible. The alphabet story, however, was told to entertain. It's full of amusing characters. The pathetic Adam, the determined Lilith, and it's a tight, fun little narrative that's easily remembered. No one is trying to show off the depth of their scholarly knowledge. They are just trying to tell a good story, and they are succeeding. If you encounter a story about Lilith in the modern day, it's likely to be based on this one, although often the specific argument about sexual positions is removed to be replaced by a more prosaic disagreement about equality. As if those repeating the story knew that something wasn't quite right and were trying to subtly correct it. That the story from the alphabet became the most popular account was to have enormous repercussion for the perception of Lilith, especially in the 20th century. After all, by the logic of the legend, Lilith was right. She and Adam were equals, made of the same clay. There were attempts to undermine this aspect of the story. In one rabbinic version, it stated that Lilith was made from scum and filth left over from Adam's creation. Technically still clay, but definitely not equal, but these never truly took hold. However, whichever version of these Lilith legends was being told, all place Lilith as a malignant force in the Garden of Eden, who had reasons for wishing harm on Adam, Eve, and God, and it's likely because of this, as well as our demon's penchant for snakiness, that she's often connected with the serpent. The snake of Eden has always presented a bit of a problem. Despite being a key player in the fall, there is never any explanation in the biblical account as to why a seemingly random creature suddenly decided to persuade Eve to eat the apple. So how did it make it to the garden? Yeah. The entire episode feels like an etiological, just so story for why the serpent crawls into on its belly, awkwardly inserting itself into the legend of mankind's expulsions from paradise. Because of this, there are numerous versions where the serpent is given more of a personality that it has in the Bible, normally by connecting it to another biblical figure who had an actual reason for wanting to hurt Adam and Eve. We all know who wanted to hurt them, but anyway, the all-knowing one. Often this figure is Satan, or Samael, who is often himself connected with Satan. The fallen angel returning to Eden, disguising himself as a snake and alternatively persuading the snake, or alternatively persuading the snake to help him. When Lilith was partnered with Samael, this drew her into the narrative even more closely, until eventually she became the snake herself. In the Zohar, she is specifically referred as a serpent. This connection is further helped by the fact that when God is handling out punishments, he tells the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed." Genesis 3:15 or 1:5. This is simply a way of saying that humanity, that is, Eve's seed, and all serpents, that is, the seed of the original garden serpent, will not get along. Yet with Lilith as a serpent, this suddenly takes on a new meaning. Lilith's seed refers to her demons, a demon offspring who will plague humanity, while Eve's seed refers to the children whom Lilith will kill. It was this serpentine aspect of Lilith that made its presence most felt in the Christianity of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. While Jews were being persecuted across Europe, interest in the Cabala was spreading. Some Christian commentators decried the Kabbalistic legends, repeating them as they did so, and so spreading them further. Lilith's story was one of the many that spread in its way, and it's especially well represented in art. It's not just Michelangelo who painted her. She is there in Titans, The Fall of Man, an oddly childish head and torso stuck on a snake tail, a pair of tiny horns protruding through her curly hair as she hands Eve the apple. She is on a Flemish statue base from the 1500s, her snake tail curling behind her, watching as a greedy Eve clutches 3 apples to her chest and crams another into her mouth. She is there in an image from the 12th century Bible, a spindly little thing with long, loose hair perched on a tree, and in a fresco from the 1420s in a Bologna church, a woman's head somewhat precariously balanced on a snake's body. She even appears on a drawing of Notre Dame, a busty 13th century figure at the entrance to the church, watching from her tree as Eve bites into the fruit. Normally, Lilith is only pictured at the fall, but we do have one medieval Christian image of her pre-fall. In Uccello's 15th century fresco of the creation in the church of Santa Maria Novella in Florence, Lilith is crammed into the corner of the image with the animals, just underneath a very dubious-looking bull. That's an interesting reference because in the book of Enoch, the 3 of them, Eve, Adam, and Lilith, are described as bulls. On the other side of the panel, Adam is being made. Lilith's placement with the animals is a very clear indication that any sort of equality she might claim for the time of her creation is laughable. She is a beast rather than a true counterpart to man. Just in case there could be any mistaking that first woman, Uccello wrote her name across her forehead. But as a reminder of just how intertwined our demons are, the careful lettering reads Lamia. The two would often be equated in Europe, their connection immortalized in a Vulgate translation. in a Vulgate translation of Isaiah 34:13, which translates Lilith as Lamia. Anyway, I think I'm going to stop here. There are quite a few, obviously we still have quite a bit of a book to go through, but the next chapters kind of start with the interference that Lilith had on the real, okay, let me rephrase that, on like normal people, not just Adam and Eve, and the collection there. I absolutely love this section of the book. I already knew that I was going to really like it, but I really found it very entertaining. I have never heard about this Alphabet of Ben Sira or whatever his name, but now I wish that I had read it as well, and maybe I will. Maybe I will find it somewhere, and maybe I will even read it in a video. Who knows? Either way, this story is very interesting to me, obviously because, well, I'm not religious, right? And being me not religious, and being me so much interested in mythology and having read quite a few things from Bible, especially the Old Testament, I did already kind of, know about all these situations. And then again, I read I did read parts of Book of Enoch. As I mentioned, it is not accepted as an official book. I don't even know, as an official instruction book for Christianity, especially by, like Catholic Church. But I do know that in Ethiopia they do have it as one of the holy texts, or whatever you call it. Anyway, and Lilith is mentioned there again in the way of the bulls. There are 3 bulls, the white one, the black one, and the red one, and then there's this whole disagreement between the bulls, and one of them runs away. I don't remember if it's the red one or the black one or whatever. It doesn't really matter. And I find it interesting that these details are kind of showing up here and there. Either way, why do I find this story interesting? Precisely because of what was mentioned, kind of in the entire story, but more so in the alphabet, because it's clearly stated, right? So I don't know, maybe this video is going to be too long, and probably most of you are gone, just the ones that, I don't know, or asleep. But to me, this section is great because it's not like I believe that the story is true, right? It's not that at all. My point is that this is a great example of how things are absolutely not considered or taken into account for context, right? So let's say God is there. He did create. See, like my brain. He did create Adam and Lilith, and then she was like, you know what? I don't think so. And like neither God nor Adam were able to handle her. Like seriously. Like just as it was said, like it really is kind of showing both Adam and God in a very pathetic light.
and it was mentioned. Not only that, right, they try to push her to the edge of, okay, so now that you don't want to be with Adam, or don't want to be helpful, or don't want to follow our rules or whatever, now you are going to be the mother of all demons, right? And I have never heard about this separation story where after the fall from paradise, Adam and Eve kind of separate for 130 years. So I find this interesting, and I'm going to research it a bit more because I have never heard that before. And the fact that, again, Adam just goes on a procreation spree, same as Eve, right? But we are saving her chastity or purity or whatever, because obviously Christianity is this whole misogynistic shebang, right? Anyway, so yeah, I'm just, my brain is just firing up into different sides, but because of these new things that I learned that I want to then follow up on, either way, I loved this story. Again, I wanted to read about demons and, starting with Lamashtu, Lamia, Lilith, all of them going towards Lilith, and how they all borrow things from one another, and how the story develops, and all of that. And obviously also how, just a demon goddess coming from Lamashtu and then arriving into Lilith can destroy the whole credibility and put the god himself into a pathetic light. Anyway, I said what I said. I may have made some people angry, but me, whatever. Okay, I think that should be it for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.